181. Reaching consensus. No. Brady sounded panicked, his eyes darting. His health has always been good. It's only recently. Luis ignored the protest and quickly, carefully checked the soldier's pupils and overall condition. When he finished, he thought for a moment, then turned to Brady. Are you sure he's just sick? Aye. Brady hesitated, fumbling for an explanation. Fine. Stop wasting time. Merle, standing to the side, crossed his arms and sneered impatiently. Look at this coward. He's hiding something. He stepped forward as if to pull Luis away. Come on. Let this unlucky bastard choke on his own lies. Wait. Don't go. Brady blurted, as if struck by a late thought. Seeing the rescuers really preparing to leave, he hurried on. It's the medicine. It was caused by taking a certain kind of drug. What medicine? Luis narrowed his eyes and asked carefully. Was it a dark red powder? Brady snapped his head up, shock written all over his face. How did you know? Luis didn't answer the question directly. He simply nodded once, calm and certain. Looks like your luck held up. He pushed Brady aside, pulled a small glass vial from his pocket, and showed a green liquid. It was a portable version he had prepared for emergencies, diluted from a bottle of strong antidote Harry had sent him after testing. Pry his mouth open, Luis barked. Brady froze for a heartbeat, stunned by what Luis intended to do. But Otis and Shane, who trusted Luis, reacted instantly. Without a word, they took positions on either side of the seized soldier, forced his clamped jaw open, and held it. Luis uncorked the vial and poured the emerald liquid down the man's throat. As the medicine slid in, something miraculous happened. Less than 10 seconds later, the soldier who'd been convulsing and rolling his eyes suddenly went rigid, then went limp like a deflated balloon. The terrible spasm stopped. His breathing eased from frantic to steady, and color returned to his face, visibly. Brady watched, stunned, then turned to Louis, disbelief in his eyes. What did you give him? No one has ever recovered that fast. The captain's face then lit with suspicion. Wait, have you had dealings with people who sell medicine? Did you trade with that dealer for this antidote? The effect was so strong it was only natural to suspect a link to the mysterious drug peddlers. Louis capped the vial and slipped it back into his pocket. He answered plainly, I made this antidote myself. You saw these medicine sellers? Brady pressed. No, Louis said, but I have seen patients who took the same stuff. He explained, calm and measured. Not long ago, in a town basement, we found a group of delirious students, SADA. They were found too late. Some suffered irreversible brain damage. We couldn't save them. He paused, watching Brady's expression. Before we left, I took blood samples and collected the dark powder we found there. Tests showed it's a new toxin that targets the central nervous system, Louis finished. Brady's suspicion melted into a deeper shock. He stared at the young man before him. You mean, you made this antidote based on those samples? To be precise, it's the result of my team's work, Louis said, not taking sole credit. He let the other pieces fall into place. The elder who taught me worked at the Atlanta CDC before the outbreak. When we evacuated, we managed to take some portable but essential testing gear. With a sample, we can use chemical methods to make neutralizing agents. It's not that hard for us. At the mention of the CDC, the two soldiers who had been wary earlier relaxed. Brady's doubts vanished, and he brightened. In that case, you must have more of it, right? We need it. He hurried to add awkwardly, I'm willing to trade supplies for it. Louis's pulse quickened. Demand meant a bargaining chip, but he didn't reveal eagerness. He shook his head, cautious. This vial is an emergency version for acute attacks. Fully clearing the toxin isn't as simple as a one-time drink. I need to tailor a treatment to each patient on site, considering weight, attack frequency, pupil response, and other data. The wrong dose could fail to save them or even kill them. Brady, after a moment, found the explanation reasonable. He hesitated, then offered, Why don't you come to our camp? Our temporary station isn't far. You can take your time there. Darrell and Merle, silent until now, both frowned. Louis waved his companions down, then replied to Brady politely but firmly. I appreciate the offer, but we don't know you. Entering a camp full of armed people is a major security risk. As a soldier, you should understand that. I also don't have enough raw materials or equipment here. I need to go back, prepare, and consult with my team. Brady blinked, then asked, Then what do you want us to do? Meet me here tomorrow at noon, or somewhere nearby sheltered from the wind, Louis said, pointing to the clearing beneath them. Bring the patients who need treatment. I'll bring proper tools and more complete medicine. We'll do preliminary diagnoses here, and if they can be treated, we'll discuss payment. If you're sincere, we can set up a long-term cooperation. Brady thought it over. Moving the sick would be risky, but if his men could be cured, it would be worth it. He glanced at his comrade on the ground, the man who'd just been saved, and nodded heavily. Good. It's a deal. They quickly worked out a few more details and didn't linger. Brady and his men helped the dazed soldier to his feet. They thanked Louis and his group and hurried back into the woods. Louis led his team away as well. "Tsk, kid can really spin a yarn," Merle muttered once they were a safe distance off, his tone mocking. "What was that stuff anyway? If there's any extra, I want some." "That's for people with brain damage," Louis said dryly. "If you admit you're sick, maybe I'll give you some." "Hey, what did you say?" They bickered as their figures melted into the jungle. After they'd gone, a nearby thicket rustled. A figure in a cloak stepped out slowly, dragging 2 heavy iron chains. 2 walkers, missing arms and with gaping torn jaws, followed dully behind. It was a woman carrying a bundle. She glanced in the direction Louis and the others had left, her dark brown face unreadable. Then she tightened her grip on the chains and, leading the 2 hair-raising pets, slipped silently into the shadows in the opposite direction. After returning to the prison, Louis explained the situation to everyone in detail. Opinions varied about making contact with a fully armed squad of strangers, but once Louis described what that bottle of antidote did and outlined the potential benefits of winning over a regular army unit, Rick decided it was worth a try. An alliance with a heavily armed military unit, even a temporary one, would be a huge boost to the prison's safety. After a night of careful planning and deployment, they set out again early the next morning. A cold winter mist hung over the countryside. They'd agreed to meet at a small country church by the highway. Open terrain, good visibility, no cover nearby, an ideal spot for negotiations. Rick brought Daryl, Louis, and Andrea, who was on guard duty. They arrived early and took up positions. A low roar of an engine cut through the fog as a military green troop carrier rolled slowly to a stop by the roadside. The door opened and an officer in uniform stepped down first, followed by Corporal Brady, who they'd seen the day before, and several fully armed soldiers. The men held rifles but looked exhausted and unwell. Pale faces, dark circles under their eyes, signs of long-term tension and sleep deprivation. One of them kept twitching at the corner of his mouth. Even with muzzles lowered on both sides, the air was tense. The officer introduced himself bluntly. "I'm Lieutenant Wells." He scanned Rick and the others, lingering on Rick because of the assault rifle slung across his chest. "Is this your team? They look capable. So, where's the doctor?" "The doctor's old and has trouble getting around," Rick said. "This kind of meeting isn't right for him to attend in person." Louis stepped forward, carrying a metal first aid kit, and said matter-of-factly, "He handles the core treatments. I handle the initial screening and assessment. Only after they pass my inspection will we take them back," Wells replied. "You?" Louis asked. Wells frowned, a trace of disbelief in his voice. "Seriously, now is not the time to play doctor and patient with the infected." He turned toward Rick, his tone hardening. "Sir, I'll respect you, but please respect our time. This poison is deadly. We don't have time for mistakes. We won't waste precious medical supplies on jokes," Rick said flatly. "Louis is the best medic we have, and the old doctor's only student. If you don't trust him, we don't have to continue this." The mood stiffened. Just as Wells was about to respond, Corporal Brady stepped forward and leaned in to whisper. "Sir," Brady said firmly, "I think we can trust them. That infected man saved Jamie yesterday, and that bottle of medicine really works. Jamie slept better last night than he has in a month." Wells looked from Brady to Louis and back again, thinking it over. After a moment, he shrugged. "Fine." He signaled for one of the more visibly unwell soldiers to step forward. "Since you're so confident, give it a try." Louis didn't say anything else. He put on rubber gloves, opened the first aid kit, and motioned for the soldier to sit. The soldier didn't take the procedure seriously at first, slumped posture, wandering eyes, answering Louis' questions in a bored tone. How long have you had these symptoms? Lewis asked. About a week or two, the soldier said, casually picking at a zipper on his uniform. Louis didn't react to the attitude. From watching the late-stage cases in the basement, he knew what to check. He moved to several key nerve reflex points, pressing the back of the soldier's neck, then testing finger joints. His moves weren't rushed. He watched the soldier's reactions closely. The indifferent soldier suddenly stiffened and tried to pull his neck away. The spot Louis had pressed flared with a sharp, aching pain, a tender point the man hadn't even noticed before. Louis made a note on his chart without looking up. Have you felt a big drop in energy lately? Not ordinary fatigue, more like your brain can't shut off? The soldier stopped picking at the zipper. He straightened a little and met Louis' gaze. A bit, yeah, that's exactly it. Louis looked up and held the soldier's eyes. And sometimes you're very sleepy, but when you close your eyes, there's this constant noise, like static from an old TV. The casualness vanished from the soldier's face. Yes, he leaned forward, voice serious. I told my teammates, but they thought it was stress or auditory hallucinations. Sometimes the noise is so loud it's unbearable. Louis nodded, as if this confirmed what he expected. His gaze dropped to the soldier's left hand, which had been curled without him realizing it. He tapped the fingertips lightly with the tip of his pen. Even in the middle of winter, when you stop moving, do your fingertips go numb? Do you sometimes feel you can't control your fingers? The soldier looked at his hand, then back at Louis, surprise flickering in his eyes. Yes, he gave a bitter smile. They go really numb. Sometimes I feel like my fingers aren't even mine. He hesitated, then added, I've never described it like that to anyone, but that's exactly how it feels. Swordswoman? The whisper rippled through the crowd and fell into sudden silence. The nearby soldiers who had been murmuring suddenly went quiet, trading surprised looks. The symptoms Louis had described were ones they all recognized in themselves, symptoms they'd never known how to put into words. No need to be surprised. Louis withdrew his hand and shut the medical file, keeping his voice steady and composed in front of the stunned faces. These are all typical symptoms. It was a half-truth. Louis had inferred these early-stage signs by working backward from the late-stage cases he'd seen in the basement. The numb fingertips line had been a probe. He'd noticed the man rubbing his fingers since he sat down, and he already had a fallback. If the soldier had said no, he could easily have followed with, then it means your condition's still optimistic. In an apocalypse marked by constant stress, poor nutrition, and perpetual danger, who wouldn't suffer from tinnitus, insomnia, or numbness sometimes? Louis was simply taking those common complaints and shaping them with confident medical rhetoric into specific reactions to the drug. Interpretation was a powerful tool, and he genuinely believed he could cure these people. Lieutenant Wells watched quietly, letting the tension he'd been carrying slowly drain away as he sized up Louis's professional manner. Half an hour later, Louis finished examining everyone they'd brought. The situation's slightly better than I expected, but only slightly. He removed his gloves and summarized. Most of these are in the early stages and can be cured with drug intervention and metabolic regulation. Only Jamie's condition from yesterday is really serious. This kind of treatment requires a stable environment and specialized equipment, he continued. Just taking pills out in the field won't do. They need to be hospitalized and observed. He paused, then added, also, the medicine itself takes rare raw materials and a complex preparation process. We'll need time. Wells listened solemnly. Though still skeptical, he'd heard his men nodding when Louis had accurately named their symptoms, and he remembered Jamie's state the previous day. He met Rick's eyes and made his decision. We understand, Wells said. He looked at his hopeful men, drew a breath, and then to Rick, if the men can be completely cured, we'll pay whatever it takes. Then let's discuss specifics. Rick nodded and motioned Wells aside. The two moved to a nearby tree and began negotiating supplies and terms. While the adults handled business, Louis stayed by the truck and watched Brady sort gear. He took the chance to ask casually, how exactly did you run into that drug seller? If the medicine has such terrible side effects, why did you buy it? Louis had been puzzling over that himself. In the original timeline, Wells's squad had been stationed some distance from the prison, and whatever connection the mysterious seller might have to the fake teacher Alan suggested her range was primarily in this area. How had the squad crossed paths with her? Brady stopped and let out a rueful laugh. Funny thing, we never actually saw her. You never saw her? Louis asked, eyebrow raised. Brady shrugged and recalled, our camp took in a group of refugees earlier. They had a lot of that red powder. They said they'd traded with a mysterious woman up north who wrapped herself tight like a Muslim woman. We didn't think much of it at the time. Then on one run, we got surrounded by a huge horde. Some of the guys were about to break, so they tried some of the powder. Brady's dark humor cracked into regret. It was miraculous. After taking it, they didn't feel tired, afraid, or cold. One was out in the snow for hours and didn't complain. It made us so much more effective. But because there were no side effects at first, everyone relaxed. We only noticed the problems much later. Did you ever find the cellar? Louis pressed. No, Brady said, jaw tight. But we did track someone in the woods. A weird person who kept showing up in that area. A suspect? Louis leaned forward. Yeah, a strange woman in a dark hooded cloak. She didn't talk, and she carried a very long katana on her back. Brady's expression went wary. And get this, she walked 2 walkers on chains. Their arms and jaws were cut off. She kept them leashed like pets. Who does that? We tried to stop her and ask questions, but she ran off without a word. Louis felt his eyelid twitch. The description was all too familiar. Without proof, he'd bet Daryl's crossbow that they'd identified the wrong person. For a heartbeat, his face went blank before he forced a smile. That does sound strange, he said aloud, but it doesn't prove anything. Walkers can mask the scent of living people to some extent. Maybe she's just an experienced survivor using that method to move through hordes. Inside, he was panicking. These people were talking about Michonne. In the original story, she'd been a powerhouse, an essential member of Rick's future group, loyal as family. She looked odd and kept to herself at first, but she had a deep sense of justice and warmth. God, they were mistaking a hero for the drug peddler. This was a catastrophic misunderstanding. Wells and Rick, having finished their discussion, returned and overheard the tail end. Wells glanced at Louis and frowned. We've considered the possibility you mentioned, he said. But her timing and location are too consistent, and her behavior is suspicious. Either way, we have to find her and get answers. If we don't know the source, we'll always be at a disadvantage. 184. Drug ingredients. Louis could only nod awkwardly. Watching the soldiers' faces, all hard with resolve, gave him a headache. Even if this matter didn't directly involve him, a lone wolf like Michonne wasn't easy to catch. If they surrounded and subdued her by force, any injuries on either side would be a huge loss, and it might even turn the swordwoman, who could have been an ally, against them. He mentally noted to find a way to smooth things over later and avoid pointless internal conflict. It's settled, he said. Rick clapped Louis on the shoulder and nodded. After a tense exchange, both sides had reached an agreement. The military would hand over a supply of arms, ammo, and fuel, and let the prison use a truck in return for Louis's team treating all the poisoned soldiers. Louis didn't relax. He looked straight at Captain Wells and spoke carefully. Captain, one thing I must make clear first. He chose his words to leave himself an out. I'm confident I can treat them, but this drug is clearly highly addictive and destructive. What I can do is detoxify them with medication, relieve the physical pain, stop convulsions, bring down fevers, repair some damage to the nervous system. In other words, at best, we can stop them from acting out or dying from physiological causes. He paused and stressed the next point. Repairing the nervous system takes time. For a while, they may still feel weak, anxious, and there's a real risk of relapse. That was the margin Louis had deliberately carved out. He also had a limited stock of potion in his case that needed to be managed. Even if he could give everyone a bottle and make them instantly well, the result would be astonishing and suspicious. Wells didn't seem displeased. The explanation matched his medical intuition. That's acceptable, he said. Some of the weapons and food had already been loaded as earnest onto the pickup Rick drove. Pleasure doing business with you, Wells said. Though he looked a little regretful, he clasped Rick's hand solemnly after glancing over Jamie and the others who'd been settled. Once the military jeep departed, the group drove back to the prison in the newly acquired truck, loaded with the sick and the supplies. 2 days later, Sector D of the prison. A remote, quiet cell had been converted into a makeshift lab for Dr. Jenna. Most of the equipment was scavenged from the CDC, old but luxurious compared to the current world. When Louis pushed the door open, a faint smell of disinfectant came out. He walked straight to Dr. Jenna, who was frowning over a microscope. "Doctor, is there a problem?" Louis asked. Dr. Jenna didn't turn right away. He was still peering through the eyepiece, gently adjusting the focus. After a long moment, he sighed and finally looked up. "You're back." He pinched the bridge of his nose and looked tired. "The powder sample you brought, I couldn't run a full analysis. Reagents are limited, but I can identify the main components." Louis' heart jumped. He'd used his potion to ease the soldier's symptoms, but he didn't truly know what the substance was. Main components? What are they? Some new synthetic? Dr. Jenna hesitated, then asked instead, "Louis, have you ever wondered why walkers keep moving even after most of their brains are dead?" Louis shook his head. "No, why? The virus is just the trigger. The physiological mechanism is the key." Dr. Jenna stood and walked to a whiteboard cluttered with formulas. "At the CDC, we did detailed scans and monitoring of test subjects. We found most areas of a walker's brain are necrotic, but there's one region, the brainstem, that remains strangely active." He drew a rough diagram and pointed above that area. "Especially here, the locus coeruleus." "Locus coeruleus?" Louis echoed the unfamiliar term, a bad feeling rising in his gut. "Yes, it's the brain's main center for producing norepinephrine." The doctor's voice took on the tone of a lecturer, but the content chilled him. In a healthy person, it regulates arousal, vigilance, and the stress response. In walkers, the virus appears to lock this region in an activated state. It continuously secretes a mutated neurotransmitter that cuts off the body's sense of fatigue, blocks pain, and hyperexcites motor nerves. "So they can wander endlessly, keep moving even with severed limbs," Louis finished, staring at the board. Hearing the description, tirelessness, pain suppression, motor excitation, Louis felt the connections snap into place. "So," his voice tightened, "if this works in walkers, could it work on living people?" "We never did such unethical tests," Dr. Jenna said, putting down the marker, his face grave. "But theoretically, if someone extracted and purified this mutated substance, it could take effect in living humans. It could turn people into tireless supermen, basically living, zombified athletes." Louis's stomach turned. He swallowed and forced himself to ask, "You're not saying the main ingredient of that red powder is?" "Doctor." Jenna closed his eyes and answered bluntly, "Yes, it's the locus coeruleus. To be precise," he added, "it's an air-dried ground extract of the walker's brainstem tissue, which contains the locus coeruleus." Even prepared, Louis felt bile rise. He stared at the data, then a memory flashed, Merle mentioning having found headless walkers in the woods during a scavenging run. Back then, everyone had laughed it off as some sick joke. Now Louis saw those could have been people harvesting raw material. "This is worse than I thought." Dr. Jenna picked up an analysis report, the weight in his voice heavy. "The extract takes advantage of the adrenergic system to forcibly overdraw the body's resources, and it's highly addictive. The soldiers got lucky." He pointed to figures on the sheet. Whoever made the powder added other chemicals and stabilizers to reduce toxicity and kept doses relatively low. Otherwise, that soldier Jamie wouldn't have lasted long enough to reach you. His brain would have fried from overheating and overexcitation. Louis said nothing. He thought over the logistics. Anyone could hack open a walker's head, but to refine it, balance doses, and add compounds to control its toxicity required materials, tools, and a steady workspace. The woman selling the drug might be just a street-level dispenser. Behind her could be an organized group with a production facility, and if they were selling around here, that operation couldn't be far from the prison. Dr. Jenna set the report aside, and after a pause, asked quietly, "Louis, may I ask you something?" 185. Doubt Louis's thoughts were interrupted. His heart tightened for a moment, then relaxed. He already suspected what the other man wanted to ask. It would make sense for the question to be about the 8. The potion's effects were simply too extraordinary. His previous excuse, that he had seen similar cases before and prescribed the right medicine, wouldn't fool a doctor. He'd even rehearsed several answers in his head. "Of course, doctor," Louis said, trying to sound composed. To his surprise, the doctor didn't ask about the ingredients. "Why do you always want to go out?" Dr. Jenna asked instead, looking down at the blond boy who wasn't even chest high, his expression unreadable. "We all know how unusual your condition is." After a pause, his tone softened. "I've watched you. You're not thrill-seeking, and you're not rebelling to prove something. You're steady, studious, more rational than most adults." He pointed toward the window. "The world outside is rotten. Walkers, thugs, lawless killing. You've been a huge help, but frankly, Rick and the others could handle most of those dangers without you. Everyone here is doing their best to give you shelter." Dr. Jenna met Lewis's blue eyes. "You have time and resources to research and live a stable life, so I don't understand. Why put yourself in harm's way?" Lewis lifted an eyebrow. That was far from the question he'd expected, but it wasn't hard to answer. The truth was simple. He needed to get stronger quickly. As a transmigrator with a god's eye knowledge, he knew more troubles were coming. Governor, 7, 6, and his current strength wasn't enough. He didn't actually go out that often. His days at the prison were full of studying 16. To keep up his persona as a genius, he devoured medical texts, learned to repair circuits, and practiced hands-on skills. But occasional outings were necessary. After learning some 16, he needed targets and places to practice. If he couldn't go outside to test Obliviate or other offensive spells on ill-intentioned people and walkers, was he supposed to use them on the teammates he lived with? And his 0 needed constant attempts to charge so he could contact the other world. He couldn't say all this bluntly. Louis fell silent for a moment, shaping his reply. Saying he was training or protecting the team sounded weak. He decided to add some broader logic. "To stay alive, Doctor." He looked straight into Dr. Jenna's eyes, but not by hiding behind walls and barely clinging to life. "The prison is safe, but if we all keep retreating, the outside won't fix itself. If the walls fall one day or our supplies run out, we'll still be trapped." Louis walked to the door. "You said my constitution is special. Maybe it sounds arrogant, but since fate gave me this immunity and this brain, I can't just be a protected mascot. Whether it's the locus coeruleus or other changes, I have to see and touch them myself to understand. Only by knowing the rules out there can we take the initiative. I want to try to do something. Maybe my ability isn't enough now, but someone has to take the step to find a way to end this. Even if it's only a tiny chance, I don't want to have to imagine what civilization was like from piles of yellowed books in the future." Half of what he said was poetic padding to hide his true motives, but as he spoke, he realized some of it rang true. If he really couldn't go back to Hogwarts, making this rotten world a little more bearable didn't seem like a bad goal. Dr. Jenna didn't reply right away. He leaned against the lab bench, hands in his lab coat pockets, eyes on Louis, but looking past him to something else. After a long moment, he exhaled and rubbed his tired cheeks. "In the CDC basement, when I saw Rick on the screen calling for help, I hesitated a long time before opening the door. At that moment, I even thought about turning off the monitors and letting it end. But looking at you now, I'm glad the button I pressed opened that door." He smiled, and the smile softened his face. "I'm glad I walked out of it myself." The air grew heavy, and Louis felt slightly awkward. Doctor? I thought you were going to ask about that 8. An antidote?" Dr. Jenna chuckled despite himself and shook his head. He reached for the microscope, his fingers brushing the cold metal. "I'm past the age of being curious about everything." He peered into the eyepiece, eyes distant. "My wife used to joke that the end of science is intuition. There's truth to that. For ordinary people, a difficult problem is a mountain to climb a lifetime. For her, the mountain didn't exist. She'd look once, and the answer was already at the finish line." He turned to Louis with a nostalgic smile. "In you, I see her. If she'd had a child, they'd probably have been like you." Words Louis had prepared stuck in his throat. Looking at the exhausted man before him, pity bloomed. If that medical genius were still alive, maybe the world would be different. Unfortunately, there aren't many ifs in this place. "Ahem. Thank you for understanding, Doctor," Louis said, breaking the melancholy. He seized the moment to shift the conversation. "About that bottle, I told the soldiers it was the result of our joint research, mainly based on your CDC experience. Dr. Jenna nodded without hesitation. He picked up the test report on the locus coeruleus, his expression falling into its familiar seriousness. If they ask, tell them that's the truth. 186. Going out. A month passed in the blink of an eye. As the bite of winter finally eased, the prison stirred back to life. In a room in Block D, Louis turned a small, special vial over in his hand and smiled with satisfaction. His gamble had paid off. He diluted the raw antidote and split it into many little vials. Even at that dilution, the stuff was potent. With ordinary medical care and occasional psychological counseling, the poisoned soldiers recovered far better than anyone had expected. The brutal nerve pain vanished, and withdrawal symptoms were kept to a minimum. Men who used to gasp for breath after a few steps had regained their strength and were able to work again. Even more surprisingly, the misunderstanding about the sword woman had been smoothed over during the recovery process. At first, the soldiers still resented the cloaked woman who'd shown up in the woods, who in their minds would bother tying two walkers to walk them like pets. Then they saw the strange sight outside the prison, the walker guards. Between Louis's explanations, sometimes deliberate, sometimes offhand, and his steadying words that helped clear the woman's name, the men's attitude shifted. When Wells learned that the scheme to use walkers to drive off other walkers had actually been thought up by the polite young man in front of him, he sighed and shook his head. "We were just being ignorant," he admitted. "Maybe that woman's like the rest of us, just trying to survive." Louis felt a mix of relief and regret. If he could meet Michonne, he would have no hesitation in bringing that warrior into the prison, but despite his scouting trips over the past month, he hadn't seen the cloaked figure. With the prison's internal affairs complicated, recruiting her would have to wait. Still, even without new recruits, the original groups at the prison had integrated well. Time together forged trust between the soldiers and Rick's people. They scavenged in mixed teams, and even Merle, grating as ever, had grown used to them. One afternoon, after Louis saw Brady squatting by a car, offering Daryl a cigarette while complaining sourly. "I don't know how you grew up with that guy," Brady said. "His mouth sounds like a walker's been chewing on it. Every word makes you want to shoot him." Daryl accepted the cigarette without expression, shoved it behind his ear, and said flatly, "You'll get used to it. Treat him like a fart. Hear the noise. Don't breathe it in." Comfort and routine in the apocalypse never lasted long. Just when everyone hoped winter would pass smoothly, trouble came. Early that morning, Captain Wells came for Rick, his face drawn and grim. "Something's happened," he said. "I can't reach the base." "Maybe it's a bad signal," Rick suggested. "Radio acting up?" "No." Wells took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "A few days ago, I sent a squad back. They rang me as they reached the base. If everything was normal, they should have come back with supplies yesterday. But there's been nothing. And just now I finally got through," he continued, voice low. "There was nothing but static, then heavy gunfire and screams. I heard people calling for help, but only for a few seconds before the signal cut out." "No contact since?" Rick asked. "No." Wells shook his head. "I don't know what happened. Our base has high walls, serious firepower. It shouldn't have fallen so fast." Louis, leaning against the wall with a cup of hot water, felt a cold wave in his chest. According to what he'd expected, the National Guard base might fall eventually, but not for months. Winter wasn't even over. Had diverting soldiers to the prison weakened the base? He swallowed the thought. Then Wells spoke with sudden resolve. "My comrades and the families of some of my men are still at the base. There's still heavy weaponry there. I don't believe it's all gone. If there are survivors, I can't just leave them." He began to marshal his men to return. "Wait," Rick said. Wells paused and forced a small, tired smile. "Sorry, Rick. We might have to go. If we can make it back, our previous agreement still stands." Rick said nothing more, just pulled on his jacket. "We're coming with you." Wells looked startled, then shook his head. "No, it's too dangerous. This is our base, our problem. There's no reason to drag you in. And if they ran into a horde of walkers, with what numbers you have, it'd be a suicide mission." Rick cut him off. After a month together, the relationship between the prison people and Rick's group wasn't just transactional. "We're friends, Wells. Wells opened his mouth, emotion prickling his eyes, but he still hesitated. He didn't want the prison's people to risk themselves. Lewis, who'd been silent until now, set down his cup and spoke up, calmly and seriously. "It's not just about helping," Lewis said. "Don't forget, you still owe us half the weapons and fuel. That's a lot of supplies. If you all die out there, or the supplies get destroyed by walkers, our investment in treating and saving your people goes up in smoke." He met Wells's eyes. "Before we get what's owed to us, we can't just let you go off and get wiped out." Wells stared at Lewis. The younger man's gaze was steady and earnest, and something in Wells's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. He knew Lewis was giving him a way to accept help without losing face, an excuse masked as principle, but he was grateful all the same. 187. Camp Conditions. The moment was almost saccharine enough to make Darryl pause. He was squatting nearby, organizing his bolts, when he lifted his eyelids and shot Lewis a cold glare. The kid had probably said exactly what Darryl had been thinking. He glanced over at Wells, who looked close to tears, and at Rick, who wore a satisfied expression, and Darryl couldn't help rolling his eyes. These people were making things far more dramatic than they needed to be. The decision had already been made to go. Rick at first wanted to call everyone and move out immediately, but Shane stopped him. After a short, heated argument, and with the prison base needing a core leader, it was decided Rick would stay and Shane would lead the field team. "Then I'll come along and help you guys out this time," Merle said, putting his feet down from the table. He rubbed his hands together, grinning. "I used to be a soldier. I know how to handle those grunts. I'll be better than you." "No." Before Rick could reply, almost everyone objected at once. "Why?" "Because we don't plan on breaking ties with our allies just yet." Shane didn't even look up when he spoke. "Don't worry, if there's ever a day we need someone to piss an enemy off to death or find somebody to bait a walker, you'll be our lead vanguard." He turned to Darryl. "You're coming with us. How about it?" Darryl shrugged. "Fine by me." Merle snorted and rolled his eyes. His gaze slid to his brother with a wicked grin. "Fine, fine. Let our little baby Darylina go. She's more popular than old Merle anyway." The nickname sent everyone into suppressed laughter. Darryl's shoulders stiffened. He slung his crossbow over his back, turned, and shot Merle a mocking look. "If more popular than you is what decides who goes, then you're the only one who has to stay and guard the place." "Pfft," Merle muttered. Glenn finally broke the tension with a laugh, then pretended to choke and start coughing to cover it up. After a few minutes of bickering, they put together a slim rescue team. Lewis managed to get himself on it, partly joking that whether the camp had fallen or a group of survivors needed rescuing, it was a good chance to charge his suitcase, and partly genuinely curious about what had gone wrong at the military camp. He folded his recent plans for studying spells into his bag and decided some fieldwork would be more interesting. "Move out." Shane pulled back the bolt on his rifle, his voice cold. "No matter what happened over there, we'll know when we see it." Engines roared and broke the early morning silence as several vehicles rolled out from the prison. Once the convoy left the main road and turned onto the branch road toward the reserve center, the scene started to feel wrong. The walkers that had once been scattered along the highway were suddenly moving together, as if pulled by some unseen magnet, converging in the same direction, the direction of the National Guard Reserve Center Wells had mentioned. Shane, riding shotgun, frowned and tightened his grip on his rifle. Something's not right. Wells sat in the back, face grim as he stared out at the drawn-together walkers, the military walkie-talkie still clutched in his hand. The static it had been emitting erupted into a piercing electronic interference. That's Jack," came a terrified man's scream, ragged with gunfire in the background. "Damn it, he was bitten. He's not Jack anymore." "We can't stop them. They're everywhere. They're inside. Run! Get in the car. We have to get out of here." "Ah!" The transmission cut off into a thin, chilling dial tone. Wells swallowed and said in a dry voice, "It's chaos inside." They crested the last rise, and the camp came into view. It was worse than they'd feared. A massive horde pressed against the perimeter wire and blast walls, a dark, dense tide that looked like an anthill scenting blood. The interior belched smoke, and gunfire snapped and popped like a barrage of firecrackers. The convoy barely had time to slow when the camp's heavy metal gate slid open with a hiss of hydraulic pressure. 3 vehicles tore out of the camp, engines screaming. The drivers were driving like men gone mad, slamming the gas without regard to walkers or obstacles, and crushing a bloody path through the crowd. The first 2 vehicles, carried by momentum, burst past the encirclement and vanished down the road. The third was not so lucky. Through his binoculars, Lewis saw the driver's window smeared in bright red. The man behind the wheel had his head cocked at a strange angle and his body was twitching. The vehicle seemed to lurch uncontrollably as it reached the gate and swerved hard to the left. Bang! Metal screamed as the vehicle slammed into the gate. The front caved in and the vehicle tipped onto its side, black smoke boiling up. The gate, still sliding, jammed among sparks and stopped in a crooked, halfway position, neither shut nor open, just wide enough for several people to squeeze through abreast. The tide of corpses outside poured in through the gap, following the overturned vehicle. They jostled and surged into the camp. "My brothers are still inside." Wells slammed his fist against the window, eyes bloodshot. "They're trapped." Shane's body went rigid as he took in the gap. "We can't just wait out here." He looked back at the team, voice firm. "There's a gap now. We have to get in and set up a defensive line. If we wait, whatever's left of the defenders will be overrun." He yanked the wheel and the Humvee, fitted with a bull bar, drove straight through the gap, grinding through rotting flesh and brittle bone. The vehicle plowed into the camp before the opening could be sealed. They hit a different kind of hell. The plaza was full of people running, with walkers in hot pursuit. Worse, some of the walkers wore the same uniforms as Wells and the others. "Get out, fast!" someone shouted. Shane kicked open the door and fired as he moved, dropping 2 lunging walkers with headshots. "We can't stay here." To the main building. 188. Amputation. Everyone spilled out of the cars and formed a tight defensive ring. Wells finally understood why Shane's group inspired equal parts fear and awe. If his own soldiers were like startled birds scattering in every direction, Shane's crew moved like a cold, efficient machine. No wasted words, a look or a gesture enough to fill positions, cover, and push forward, tearing openings through the horde of walkers. What stunned Wells most, though, was Lewis. The blonde boy from the prison, who had always seemed harmless with his books, didn't look scared at all. He barely glanced around, raised his hand, and fired. A walker that had been peeking from behind an overturned cover exploded in a spray of blood and collapsed. That was only the beginning. In the firefight that followed, Wells saw that Lewis's aim was more than precise. He had a battlefield awareness unusual for someone so young. Multiple times, Louis noticed danger a heartbeat before it struck and calmly warned teammates, snapping orders, "Go! Don't stop!" They shoved for the main building. On the second floor, a window had been thrown open, and a team of survivors leaned out, laying down a dense curtain of fire that blunted the pursuing horde. "Come in! Over here!" At the main entrance, 2 blood-smeared soldiers waved desperately. Shane and the others fought their way back and managed to slip into the hall just as the walkers pressed in. "Close the door! Quick!" With a heavy thunk, the blast door slammed shut and the bolt slid home. The banging on the other side didn't stop, but at least the monsters were cut off. Everyone slid down against the wall and gulped the murky, safe air in greedy relief. That relief lasted less than 10 seconds. "God, no!" A choked whisper from the edge of the group. A young soldier's face had gone white. He raised his left hand to show the torn sleeve and a mangled, bleeding wrist. Blood poured out. "I can't. I'm infected." "No, John," a comrade shouted, lunging forward to cover the wound. "This is impossible." Panic spread. People instinctively backed away, eyes hard with fear. A middle-aged man in a white shirt, some sort of manager, stepped forward, hand already drifting to the pistol at his waist. "For everyone's safety, maybe we should take him outside, or just finish him." "You can't." The soldier beside John stood up and shoved him away. "You have no right." "Do you want to kill all of us?" someone cried. The scene threatened to tear itself apart. Suddenly, a calm voice cut through. "Shut up. Hold him down." Everyone turned. Louis had moved to John's side without anyone noticing. He ignored the stunned looks and examined the wound with a quick, steady glance. He was bitten at the wrist. There's still time for an amputation. The man in the white shirt went pale. An amputation? Will that even work? We don't have the med supplies here. Most of the medicine's in the next building. If we try to operate here without tying off the limb, he'll bleed out, Louis replied, already moving. He swung his backpack forward, zipped it open in one smooth motion, pulled out an orange tactical tourniquet and tossed it to Shane, while pulling out a scalpel, bandages, antiseptic, and other necessary medical supplies. Shane used the tourniquet on his upper arm. Daryl, hold him down, Louis barked. Shane and Daryl reacted in a heartbeat. One cinched the tourniquet, the other pinned John to the floor. Wells, find a sharp knife or an axe, Louis shouted, ripping open a packet of antiseptic. By the time the others registered what was happening, field surgery had already begun. Wells grabbed a fire axe from a supply rack by the wall and handed it to Shane. Bite this. Louis shoved a roll of cloth into John's mouth. It's going to hurt. Hold on. John, sweating and terrified, nodded. Do it. Shane gritted his teeth and swung the axe. With a single brutal cut, ugh! The arm came off. Louis slammed the antiseptic over the severed stump, then wrapped thick layers of bandage and applied pressure with swift, practiced hands. What's his blood type? He asked without looking up. If he loses too much, we might need a transfusion. Both he and I are type A, the comrade said, finally steadying. I can donate. Good. Stand by. John passed out from the shock and blood loss, but his chest still rose and fell. He'd made it. Get him inside, Louis said. Find a clean room. They carried John into a small lounge off the main hall. While people moved and doubled up watches, Louis used the excuse to check the wound alone. With his back to the door, he made sure no one was watching, then trained his handheld med device on the bandaged stump. Episki. The device couldn't undo the amputation, but the pulse of energy eased the trauma and increased John's chance of survival. Louis packed the used supplies into a trash bag on the side of his pack, wiped the blood from his hands with a wet wipe, and stepped back into the hall. The atmosphere had shifted. Conversation cut off. Dozens of eyes, mixed with awe and gratitude, followed him. News of who Louis was and what he'd done had clearly spread. He nodded once and moved to a corner, unscrewed his canteen, and took a sip of water as the crowd watched. What exactly happened out there? Wells strode up to the dejected-looking officer from the building and demanded, anger and confusion in his voice. Why did those cars take off? Wasn't the camp's defense line secure? How did it all fall apart so suddenly? The officer left behind looked a few years older than Wells, but in that moment his face was ashen and his eyes hollow. I don't know, Wells. I really don't know. He pressed his hands to his head, despair in his voice. Everything was fine. The gates were closed, the sentries were at post, no way in, not even a dog, but right at lunchtime the alarm went off. He swallowed, terror flickering across his features. When we rushed over, there were walkers inside. I don't know how they got in. They bit whoever they saw. A lot of people were caught off guard. It was like a plague bursting out from within. Some panicked and tried to flee in cars, crashed into the entrance. We were going to the 6 to evacuate by helicopter, but that was blocked by walkers too. It's over. Everything's over. As the officer spoke, Louis leaned against the wall, his calm gaze wavering for a moment. Defenses intact, gates shut, a sudden outbreak from within. This was almost supernatural, but pieces were clicking into place in his mind. He remembered Brady saying the camp had taken in survivors over the past months, and that the 3-3 powder they'd traded earlier had come from one of those groups. Wells claimed he'd destroyed it when he found the problem, but what if someone had hidden some and taken it later? If someone overdosed and died without others knowing that everyone carries the virus dormant and will turn after death, what would those corpses do? The answer was obvious. Louis' eyes slid to Shane. They met. Shane narrowed his eyes and gave a slight nod. He'd reached the same conclusion. But now was not the time to lecture on viral mechanics. They couldn't risk shattering already fragile morale. If the soldiers learned that death inevitably led to becoming a walker, some might break down or drag others into a suicide frenzy. That would be catastrophic. Shane let out a breath and asked, his voice low and steady, "What's the situation now? How many are still alive? Most scattered and fled. The officer brushed a layer of dust from his face. This building's defenses are relatively intact, so we're safe for now. But I know some didn't make it out. They might be in the 0 to the east or the underground 1. Those are our standard evacuation points during drills. He looked toward the horde outside and didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. We have to get them. Wells clenched his fists. At least get the living out of there, even if it's hard. Then do it. Shane's voice was flat. Andrea, who had been silent, stepped forward then. She tightened her grip on her rifle and swept the room with a hard look. Fear solves nothing. Tears won't bring the dead back. We've seen worse. There's one rule for survival: don't stop. She let the words hang a moment, studying the faces in the hall. Waiting is another kind of death. It's slow and it eats you. If you want to live, keep your gun steady. If you want to save people, move. Exactly. Louis offered a reassuring smile. Like that fellow inside just now, cutting a wrist hurts. It's ugly, but if we just argued, he'd be dead by now. No time for sentiment, Andrea added. Whatever the plan is, execute it. Her words snapped people back to focus. The oppressive air lifted and discipline returned. Shane allowed a faint smile and clapped his hands to bring everyone's attention. All right, we're not running. That means we stay and pull duty. Going back empty-handed isn't my style, someone muttered. Wells exhaled. Shane, it's not luck that's kept you alive out there. You've got more field experience than any of us. Take command. Tell us what to do. Shane didn't refuse. In a crisis, false modesty would have been irresponsible. Good. He strode to the table, swept aside the mess, and called for the map. A shaken clerk handed over a dusty floor plan. Shane spread it out, tracing routes and positions until a tactical picture formed. Listen, situation's bad. We have to move fast. His finger jabbed at key spots on the map. First, the large area by the entrance. Too many walkers, no forcing our way through. He turned to Daryl. Daryl, take a few and exit from the side. Lure as many of the rotting things away from the entrance as you can. Draw them to the open space on the west side. Clear a path for the others. Daryl nodded. No problem. I'll get them moving. Second, that damn gap in the gate has to be sealed. As long as that crack's there, walkers will keep pouring in. He looked at Wells. Lieutenant, you're with me. We're going to the garage and getting a heavy vehicle. If we have to ram it, we'll ram it shut. Wells didn't hesitate. Understood. As for rescues, Shane glanced over at Andrea and a few other armed soldiers. You go to the warehouse and the 5 on the east side and check for survivors. If anyone's injured, Louis cut in calmly, priority 1 is emergency treatment. Bring them here. This building's secure. I'll stay and set up a temporary 4 and stand by, he added, surprising Shane with his practicality. Shane had worried the child would charge the front lines, but Louis had taken the safest, most useful position in the rear. Very well, Shane said. Relief flashed across his face. He looked to Al. You stay and help him. Al gave a small nod. Shane swept his hand to the remaining men. The rest of you, grab rifles and get upstairs. Occupy every window and high point. Keep watch. If a gap opens or a horde gathers, provide fire support immediately. The plan was set. The soldiers opened the spare gun cabinet, and weapons and ammunition were distributed with efficient motions. Bolts were racked, rifles came up, and the hall's mood shifted from despair to grim resolve. Shane checked his watch, face hard. Before dark, we're going to end this. Move out. 190. Face the zombies. With that command, the previously lifeless hall sprang into action as everyone prepared and rushed to their assigned positions. 10 minutes later, on the open-air parking lot at the west side of the base. Don't fire. Daryl pressed down the finger of the short-haired man beside him who was about to pull the trigger. But they're coming. A few dozen meters away, several figures swayed. The men around them swallowed nervously, their palms slick on their rifles. Why? One of the recruits, nicknamed Hedgehog Head, asked defiantly. Aren't we supposed to be drawing the walkers? He pointed at a nearby truck. If it were me, I'd climb on that roof and fire a burst into the sky. That'd get them looking this way for sure. Much more efficient. Attracting walkers and serving yourself up as a snack are two different things. Daryl shot him a cold look, as if the kid were an unweaned child. I'd love to spend a few days teaching you why firing from an exposed high point will get you surrounded by a horde. I don't think that head of yours, squashed by your helmet, can hold that much information. So shut up and do as I say." Hedgehog Head flushed and opened his mouth to argue, but Daryl's hard edge made him swallow the retort. Dejected, he obeyed. Clang! Clang! Soon a rhythmic, ear-piercing clatter echoed as they began clanging metal to draw the walkers over in groups. The pile of shambling corpses that had been wandering in front of the Thav too reacted immediately. Rotting heads turned in unison. Low, hungry groans rolled out as they started moving in stiff, lurching steps. "It actually works that well," someone muttered, tension easing. Then, in a heartbeat, crisis struck. A walker in a security uniform emerged from a blind spot. Taking advantage of a soldier's distraction, it lunged with a reeking maw for the man's neck. It was too close. His eyes went wide. He didn't even have time to raise his rifle before the rotten face hovered at the tip of his nose. Whoosh! A crossbow bolt entered the back of the walker's head, pierced the skull, and exited the left eye socket, pinning the thing where it stood. Daryl walked over, stepped on the corpse's head, and yanked the bolt free. "I'll let it slide this time." He wiped the bolt on the walker's clothes without looking back. "Next time you go out, remember to bring your eyes." While Daryl kept kiting the horde, things went sideways on the other side of the base. Shane had intended to lead 2 soldiers to search the 10, but as soon as they rushed out from the cover of the 2, they ran straight into a group of survivors fleeing the chaos. 5 or 6 of them staggered along, clothes smeared with dust and blood. 2 injured were being supported by companions while straggling walkers closed in, drawn by the scent of blood. "This way! Hurry!" Shane dropped his search plan in an instant. He raised his shotgun, blew apart the 2 walkers blocking the way, and signaled everyone back. "Back to the 11! Don't look back!" At the tail of the line, a slightly chubby teenager with black-rimmed glasses panted heavily. He carried a massive camo hiking backpack and clutched 2 bulging black duffels to his chest like an overloaded penguin. The pack dragged on his legs. He stumbled on a crack and 1 sneaker flew off, but he didn't even stop. "Drop the bags," Shane barked. "If you want to live, drop those damn things." "No, I can't." The boy sounded possessed, clutching the bags until his face went red. "These are my life. I can't drop them." With walkers already reaching out, Shane cursed, knocked the nearest monster aside with the butt of his gun, grabbed the boy by the collar, and hauled him toward the entrance. "Get inside!" They all stumbled into the 5. The door slammed shut, cutting off the snarling from outside. Everyone collapsed, gasping. "Huff! Huff!" The chubby boy finally sat down. His grip loosened and the duffels spilled. Curious hands and eyes turned to see what life-saving supplies had nearly gotten a kid killed. What tumbled out stopped the room in an eerie silence. Limited edition game controllers, stacks of PS4 and Xbox discs. The middle-aged woman beside him, likely his mother, frenzied through the other bag. There were Transformers models in pristine boxes, piles of electronic components, and a folded electric scooter. In peacetime, these things might be valuable. In the apocalypse, they weren't worth a stale crust of bread. "This is your life?" Shane's mouth twitched. He fought the urge to hit something. "Are you insane? You didn't take the canned food. You didn't take your father's photo album. You took a pile of junk," the woman shrieked. "How can this be junk? You don't understand how important they are." The boy ignored the scorn and picked up a remote-controlled car. The frantic run had done it in. The front axle was crushed. "It's over. My Helena. She's broken." He held the toy and collapsed into sobs more heart-wrenching than when they had been chased. The absurdity didn't slow Luis at all. He moved in quickly, cutting open clothes, cleaning wounds, stopping bleeding, bandaging, his hands a blur of speed and skill. "What's going on here?" an old man demanded, frowning. "Are you people crazy? Letting a kid treat wounds? Where's a real doctor? We want a doctor. If you want your companion to live, shut your mouth." Al stepped forward, rifle at the ready, and his cold glare shut the old man up. "In here, he's the best doctor." Survivors who had seen Lewis's previous work hurried over to back him up, explaining his background. Brady's earlier praise had migrated through the crowd and mutated into something grander than intended. The old man gaped, his worldview cracking. "You're saying this teenager is a CDC doctor? How is that possible?" Louis didn't know he'd somehow become a CDC physician. Once he finished with the last patient and made sure Al could handle the remaining trivial tasks, he grabbed his binoculars and ran up to the top floor. He needed to keep track of movements. Louis set up his binoculars and swept the battlefield. The rescue here was going fairly smoothly. Shane's team didn't seem to have major trouble. But when Louis shifted his view toward the west side, his brow tightened instinctively. 191, Express Delivery. Just as Daryl and the others finished their mission and were preparing to fall back, a huge floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor of the adjacent building suddenly shattered. Walkers poured out like dumplings being dropped into a boiling pot. More spilled through a side door. There had been a breach, and the dead were flooding in. The sudden tide of bodies instantly scattered Daryl's squad. Ah! The kid they called Hedgehog Head, who'd been trying to look cool by standing on the car roof, stumbled into a drainage ditch in the panic. A sharp crack sounded in his ankle, and he hit the ground, face twisted with pain. Damn it! Daryl, already several meters away, swore and spun back without hesitation. He fired his crossbow, dropping 2 walkers that lunged at the recruit, then hauled the kid up. That brief delay, though, severed their route back to the main building. The soldiers assigned to draw fire were forced to retreat first by the surging horde, leaving Daryl and the limping recruit an island in a sea of the dead, pushed into a corner by a dense wall of corpses. "Run for the containers!" Daryl shouted, firing as he moved, dragging his dead weight with him. They fought their way past stacked metal containers, kicked away a few stragglers, and finally threw themselves at a heavy metal door. "Open the door! Quick!" The recruit's hands trembled at the handle. It didn't budge. A red indicator light beside it blinked ominously. "It won't open. It needs a keycard," the recruit cried, pounding on the door with a sob. "Is anyone inside? Open up, please." But in the chaos, there was no one who would risk opening up for 2 people, followed by a wave of walkers. Daryl kicked the door, glanced back at the approaching horde, and pressed his radio to his lips through gritted teeth. "Louis, this door's locked. If there's no other way, I'll have to take this kid and make a stand out in the open." Over a dozen walkers swayed into view from the alley opposite them, sealing off the last obvious escape. On the roof, Louis's voice over the radio stayed calm. "Stay where you are. I know it needs a keycard. It's already on its way." "What?" Daryl barked. "Sent over? How? What are you talking about?" "Close enough. Look up." The recruit's eyes widened. "Wait, what's that?" A red blur streaked through the air, accompanied by the whir of a tiny motor. A wild-looking remote-controlled toy car had used a collapsed streetlight as a ramp, accelerated, and launched. It traced a perfect parabola over reaching hands and snapping jaws, landed with a thud, and then whipped into a dramatic tail flick drift across the ground, coming to rest at Daryl's feet. "This," the recruit gaped. "Don't just stand there. Grab the card." Daryl didn't hesitate. He ripped the access card taped to the roof of the toy and tossed it to the recruit. Beep! With a crisp electronic chime, the door clicked open a crack. The 2 scrambled inside and slammed it shut. Thud! Walkers began pounding the panels less than 20 seconds later. For now, the crisis was averted. Outside, the small car didn't stop. Just as the horde gathered, the toy burst into a high-pitched, jaunty electronic tune, some cheesy cartoon theme, and the walkers, always drawn to noise, turned in unison and shuffled after it as it sped away. Huff, huff. In the dark room, Daryl slid down against the door, pressed his radio, and let out a breath that was half relief, half disbelief. "We're in. Safe for now. Thanks, kid." On the roof of the main building, Louis set the remote down and sighed. Beside him, the slightly chubby kid who'd come up to help watch had lowered a small telescope. He gaped at Louis with near worship, as if looking at a deity. "Good God," he breathed. You didn't just bring my baby back, you turned her into a superhero. That leap over the containers, the drift at the end, it was perfect. You've unlocked her potential. Are you a doctor or something? That was awesome." The other adults on the roof said nothing, but kept glancing at Louis with stunned expressions. Louis felt a little bemused by the kid's over-the-top praise and the doctor label, but he didn't bother to explain. He'd worked out the restrictions on those reinforced rooms before they left, that certain buildings needed key cards, and he'd learned who held them. When he saw Daryl getting boxed in from the second floor, his mind went into overdrive. Piecing together the facility maps and walker positions, he built the most viable escape plan. The problems were distance and access control, so he requisitioned the most powerful toy car from the pile of junk, fixed a broken axle with a quick reparo charm, and taped the keycard to the roof. A risky combo of a launch ramp, the remote, and the car's speaker pulled off what looked impossible, an express delivery through a field of the dead. The brief moment of triumph on the roof ended when the radio clipped to Louis's chest crackled. "Static, do you copy?" Daryl's voice came over, and this time it carried the sound of frantic gunfire and bad news. "I don't want to ruin the mood, but I've got bad news," he said. "There's a gap in the west wall. Walkers are squeezing through right now. It's small, but it's a hole. Patch it fast." The air on the second underground floor reeked of machine oil and rot. Only a few emergency lights flickered weakly, their dying glow stretching the group's shadows into thin, wavering shapes. A deathly silence hung over the garage, broken only by the sticky squeak of combat boots on the oil-slick concrete. Guns up and nerves taut, the team pushed deeper. They had just passed a load-bearing pillar when something lunged from the shadows. Dark, armored figures surged forward, walkers in full riot gear, helmets and plates clanking as they moved. "What the hell is that?" someone hissed. The lead soldier fired on instinct. Bang! 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 Bullets rang off helmets and breastplates, sparks flying, metal clanging. The rounds bounced harmlessly. The men staggered back, trying to re-aim in a panic. One man did not retreat. Shane charged instead, barreling into the horde. This wasn't his first time with armored walkers. The gear he wore had been scavenged from those same bodies back at the prison. He sidestepped a flailing arm, rammed his rifle into a walker's visor, and snapped it down with a brutal crack. The helmet tilted, exposing a neck veined dark blue. Shane drew a short knife in a reverse grip, and in one clean stroke decapitated it. Foul blood sprayed. The corpse collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. Another lunged. Shane kicked hard into the back of its knee. It sagged to one side. Without hesitation, he thrust the knife beneath the visor, into the eye socket, straight into the brain. Two armored corpses hit the concrete nearly at once. The men behind him stood frozen, guns held but not fired. They stared at the bodies, then at Shane, who calmly wiped blood from his sleeve. "Don't just stand there," he barked. He flicked his hand at the fallen armor. "Those suits are still good. Strip them and take them with us." He reloaded a shotgun with flat, matter-of-fact movements and stopped spraying lead everywhere. "These things are slow. You have time to aim for the unarmored necks or the gaps in the visors with a knife. Stay calm." They moved on. Under an overturned Humvee, they found a man pinned, one leg trapped beneath twisted metal. Grease and grime smeared his face. He clawed at the ground as they neared. "Help me. Lieutenant Wells, is that you?" "Save me." Tears streaked through the oil on his cheeks. Wells's face brightened when he recognized him. He slung his rifle back and rushed forward. "Hang on, we're getting you out." Wells waved the others to help lift the vehicle. A hand gripped his shoulder instead. Firm, steady. "Shane," Wells urged. "We have to get him." Shane didn't answer. He shone his flashlight on the soldier's neck. A chunk of flesh had been torn away. Teeth marks had opened the skin. The man's pleading stopped mid-sob. Everyone froze. They all knew what it meant. The trapped man whimpered. The light left his eyes. Tears mixed with dirt as his body trembled. "I can still hold on. Please." A faint, muffled pop. A wisp of smoke curled from the silenced pistol in Shane's hand. The soldier slumped forward. His head fell limply as the agony on his face froze forever. "I'm sorry about your friend," Shane said quietly. He holstered the pistol and stepped over the corpse. "We don't have time to mourn. We don't have time to deal with him after he turns." Wells stood, let out a long, ragged breath, said nothing, and followed. He knew Shane was right. There were worse things than the loss they just made. After clearing the scattered walkers from the garage, they found an armored truck parked in a corner. It wore a heavy bull bar, the chassis had been reinforced, and riot mesh had been welded to its sides. "Get in," Shane ordered. Shane opened the passenger door and slid into the cab. "Wells, you drive." The engine roared to life. The heavy truck burst through the rolling shutter into blinding sunlight. The wheels chewed pavement, sending a chilling crunch through the air. Hold on tight, Wells shouted, foot to the floor. They plowed straight toward the gate breach, jammed with a mass of walkers. The bull bar shoved bodies aside, bones cracked beneath the chassis. The truck jolted over flesh and carcasses. Tires shrieked against blood-slick pavement, but the rig punched a path through the gore. "Don't slow down. Ram through," Shane yelled from the seat. A massive crash followed. The truck smashed into an overturned transport jammed in the gate. The impact flipped the vehicle several meters, clearing the opening instantly. "Reverse! Turn the truck sideways," Shane barked, keeping his eyes on the rear view. "Block the hole." Wells yanked the wheel. The truck hissed as it swung and came to rest crosswise in the gap like a wall of steel, sealing the breach shut. For a second, the cab seemed to shudder with relief. Then pale, rotting hands clawed at the windows and metal, nails scraping a banshee's sound. Decayed faces pressed to the glass, mouths gaping, useless teeth searching for fresh flesh. Inside the truck, silence fell. Wells slumped over the steering wheel, chest heaving. He was trembling, soaked with sweat. Click, the lighter's flame snapped alive. Shane leaned back and lit a cigarette, blowing a blue ring into the air between them and the thrashing bodies. He watched the smeared faces through the glass with a cold, indifferent stare. "Road's sealed," he said. He patted Wells on the shoulder and pointed to the passenger door. "Get out, back to work." Sealing the main gate didn't mean the crisis was over. There was still the breach in the outer wall that Daryl had mentioned on the radio. A section of the wall had been cut or rammed open, giving walkers another way in. "That needs fixing," Shane said. A crackle over the radio cut in, Louis' voice. "Most of the walkers in the west clearing are following my remote car. Poor, you can go at them from the containers." "There's a warehouse behind the prefab houses there," Louis added. "Should be spare wire mesh and tools. Use them." Shane glanced at the distant horde and couldn't help the small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nice work," he said, pressing the radio. "Leave it to us. Stay put in the building and don't wander off. Keep eyes on the perimeter." Shane and the others, carrying weapons and tools, sprinted hard for the west side. On the roof of the main building, Louis held his binoculars like the team's eye in the sky. Beside him, the slightly chubby otaku watched with open admiration, occasionally handing Louis a bottle of water or a snack. "Shane, two behind the container. One's crawling," Louis said into his walkie. "Copy," came the reply. Shane and Wells moved like a single unit. Almost the instant Louis warned them, they reacted and cleared the obstacles. The group reached the breach on the west side. The situation there was far from ideal, but Louis' earlier remote-controlled car diversion had paid off. Most of the walkers had been drawn away, leaving only a few stragglers near the breach. Still, more walkers were drifting in from farther out. "Move fast." They shoved over heavy discarded oil drums and sandbags. Wells and the soldiers pulled up spare barbed wire and, with pliers, wrapped it layer by layer around the rebar on both sides to rebuild a temporary barrier. Everyone was focused, thinking they had it under control, until crisis arrived without warning. "Shane, behind you! 3 are sneaking up!" Shane reacted instantly. He dropped the pliers, drew his pistol, and turned. The walkers had slipped past the outer perimeter and were now less than 10 meters away, arms outstretched. Before Shane could charge, bang! The lead walker's head burst like a watermelon, blood splattering the ground. Bang, bang! 2 more shots, and the others crumpled. Shane's hand froze over his gun. A few seconds later, Andrea's voice came over the walkie, casual and amused. "You're welcome." Shane slid his knife back into its sheath, a playful smirk flashing across his face as he pressed the talk button. "You know we could have handled those, right?" "Maybe," Andrea teased. "But I prefer a sure thing. Get back to work. I'm watching." When the west breach was finally sealed, Louis exhaled and lowered the binoculars that were making his arms ache. He barely had time to relax when static crackled through the camp's speakers. Then, over the interference, a chaotic, hysterical argument filled the air. "I swear," a man shouted, voice fraying. "No walker bit him. I was right next to him. He died. A heart attack. But then he got up. He tried to eat me." "You're crazy. Put the gun down." "You don't believe me. You all think I'm crazy, right? Fine, fine. I'll prove it to you." A gunshot rang sharp and loud through the speakers, echoing between the buildings. "Damn it! He hit the console." "Turn it off!" Turn off that noise! More static, then suddenly a warped hymn filled the camp. The solemn melody was garbled and out of tune, distorted by interference, booming across the plaza of bodies and blood like something obscene. Louis's face darkened. The sound was too loud, an open dinner bell for walkers. The scattered walkers nearby stopped, turned toward the broadcast tower, and surged in that direction. The commotion drew even more from outside. They pushed inward to get closer to the sound. The barbed wire the team had just repaired groaned under the pressure. It was unclear how long it would hold. Retreat! Find cover now! Shane howled, grabbing Wells as the group scrambled for safer positions. Drawing most of the horde toward the broadcast tower was good in one sense, but the remaining stragglers near the breach were already enough to overwhelm them. This damn music's drawing them all here! We're trapped! The madman's words over the broadcast set nerves on edge. Inside the side building, Andrea was about to keep firing when a group of frightened survivors clustered around her, trembling. What did he mean? A woman holding a child asked. He said, even if we aren't bitten, as long as we die, we'll turn into those things, another voice said. Is that true? Tell me. People in the main building pressed to the windows, watching the broadcast station ringed by the horde and listening to the distorted hymn, their faces paling. Louis ignored the panic and raised his binoculars again, sweeping the terrain around the broadcast tower and watching the stream of corpses gathering in the plaza. If the sound source wasn't stopped, Shane and the others wouldn't be able to return. Once every nearby walker was drawn there, no one would get out. He pressed the talk button. Shane, hold on a bit longer. I'm going to turn that thing off. What? Shane nearly jumped at the words. No. Louis, you stay put. Daryl's in that building. He'll handle it. Louis switched channels. Daryl, I'm here. Daryl's voice came ragged, mixed with heavy breathing and the sound of someone pounding on a door. I'm right at the door of the broadcast room. The madman's in the booth. His wild shooting just smashed the equipment inside. Can you fix it? Turn it off? Louis asked. Fuck, I wish I could, Daryl cursed. I can't, and Shane's right. Can't you find someone in camp who knows how this stuff works? By the time Louis found someone who could get to the tower and actually do anything, Shane would probably be dead. He thought that, as if aloud. I could, but none of them are as fast as me. Wait, Louis, what the hell are you planning? It's crawling out there, Shane shouted. Louis didn't answer. He walked back down to the first-floor lobby toward the pile of backpacks. Under the crowd's confused gazes, he crouched, pulled out the folded black electric skateboard the otaku had brought, unfolded it, and checked the battery. Borrowing this for a bit, he said. The otaku's mouth fell open. Doctor, is it your turn to save the world now? Louis carried the skateboard toward the stairwell to the roof and paused only a moment at the words. He didn't look back. He only shrugged. No, he said. I'm just going to change the song. 194, Skywalker. The eerie music was like a poisonous gas, seeping into every corner of the camp. In the side building's hall, pale-faced survivors had gathered around Andrea and a tight cluster of soldiers, desperate for a clear answer from these armed rescuers, or at least a comforting lie. Others sat slumped by the windows, hollow-eyed and hopeless. What's the point of asking them? One muttered. A haggard woman leaned against a wall, hands shaking as she lit a cigarette and drew a slow drag. Even if what's on the radio is true, how would they know? And at a time like this, does it matter whether it's true or not? If that sound doesn't stop, none of us are getting out of here, someone else said. Might as well enjoy whatever's left of our lives. In the main administrative building, the mood was only marginally steadier. News and fear had put everyone on edge. We can't just stay like this, a stubbled soldier said, flicking his cigarette butt to the floor. If that blasted music keeps playing, every monster in the area will be drawn here. We have to go and turn it off, someone answered. A young man with glasses ground his teeth. If we can't get into the broadcasting room, we can at least shoot out a few speakers and buy time for the others. Are you insane? There's a tide of corpses out there. You'll be ripped apart before you even reach the speakers. As the argument soured into panic, Louis walked into the stairwell carrying an electric skateboard. He gave Al and Shane, who were posted to guard the stairs, a few quick instructions, then headed up without looking back. The slightly chubby otaku followed close behind, backpack bouncing, first gushing incoherently about the earlier remote car stunt, then asking, half begging, "Doctor, are you really going to shut off the broadcast by yourself? Don't you need help? And you're taking that skateboard." Their exchange carried down the stairwell. When people realized Louis was heading for the broadcasting room, the arguing crowd fell silent for a beat and then erupted. "What? That child is going to the broadcasting room? Stop him! Is he crazy?" A few older survivors lunged after him. Even the soldiers who had wanted to run the risk themselves watched with rising anxiety. "Luis, don't go." An old woman stamped her foot and shouted at Al, "Why aren't you stopping him? The walkers are everywhere. Whatever his plan, he's walking into death." "He's the only doctor here," someone called. "If he dies, who will save us?" "Someone else should die if someone has to," another cried. The crowd surged up onto the roof, trying to pull the reckless prodigy back at the last second, but Al and Shane held them off. By the time they shoved open the iron door, Louis was already on the other side. The wind bit, making his black trench coat snap and his collar rise to half cover his chin. Blonde hair whipped in the gusts. From behind, he looked grim and resolved. He ignored the shouts. He inhaled, closed his eyes for a moment, and focused. A strange feeling he'd never known rose in his chest. The clamor behind him, the distant roars of the walkers, the maddening hymns on the broadcast, all of it seemed to slide away. What came forward was an almost intuitive sense, the living people behind him radiating fear, anxiety, despair, hope. Those emotions tangled together, and as if pulled by some unseen current, felt like a tangible, invisible wind. He didn't know if it was a trick of his mind, but it steadied him. He opened his eyes, and a sharp glint flashed in his deep blue gaze. "See you later, everyone," he said. Under the terrified stares of the crowd, Louis tossed the skateboard to the rooftop and stepped onto it. The motor screamed to life, and he sped straight for the unguarded edge. "No!" people screamed. Some covered their eyes. At the brink, the skateboard seemed doomed to fly off the roof and fall. Instead, something swung down from under Louis's trench coat, a coiled grappling line and hook that snapped out with a metallic bite. Time felt suspended. In hundreds of astonished eyes, the boy on the skateboard did not plummet. Using his momentum, he traced a perfect arc through the air, skimming over the dense tide of corpses below like some legendary skywalker riding the wind. He landed on the roof of a stacked blue shipping container with a harsh screech of wheels on metal, didn't slow, and then launched himself again from the container's edge. For a breathless few seconds, he became an aerial blur, performing a series of parkour leaps that left everyone watching gasping. The otaku had pulled a video camera from his bag. Its red recording light blinked as his hands trembled, but the lens never wavered from Louis. Through the viewfinder, the kid flipping between rooftops looked less like a medic than a miracle. "He's not a doctor," someone whispered. "He's Dr. Strange." Crowds crowded around binoculars and the little screen, eyes glued to the silhouette surfing the air. He slid along a thick metal pipe strung between two buildings. His body wobbled in mid-span, making hearts lurch. Then he used that wobble to spring, landing cleanly on an awning across the gap. A man who had been bent over a crumpled suicide note looked up as a dark streak passed outside and froze, the pen dropping unnoticed from his fingers. "Am I dreaming? Did God send an angel for me?" he murmured. In less than a minute, Louis had closed in on the broadcast tower. But a fresh problem waited. The closest landing, the roof where he now stood, was separated from the control room window by a 5 or 6 meter expanse of open air. "It's over." Through the camera lens, the otaku boy cried out, panic in his voice. "The distance isn't enough. If he jumps from here, he'll smash straight into the wall." Just as everyone's hope started to die, Louis slammed down on the tail of his skateboard and launched himself. At the moment his forward momentum seemed spent and his body began to fall, he flicked his left wrist. A metallic rope shot out from his sleeve, and the grappling hook at the end caught the window frame of the rooftop across from him. Louis tucked the skateboard under his arm, grabbed the rope, and swung across the last deadly meters like Tarzan. With a crash of shattering glass, he burst through the remaining window panes and rolled stylishly into the control booth. "My God, he's basically Superman." On the main building's rooftop, the otaku watched the camera screen and bounced up and down with excitement. His fingertips trembled as he pressed save, permanently capturing a scene that looked ripped from a blockbuster, then cheered nonstop. Yes, he made it. I knew he could do it. At once a roar of relieved cheering reached his ears. Without realizing it, all the survivors on the rooftop had crowded around his camera. When the safe figure on the screen finally disappeared into the window, the group that had been terrified moments before exhaled and cheered one after another. Shane and Al finally let out a long breath as well. They lowered their binoculars and pressed their walkie-talkies to tell the others the good news. Inside the control booth, however, the mood was entirely different. Louis didn't let his guard down after entering. The room reeked of blood and gunpowder. The gunfire heard over the broadcast earlier had been real, and people had died. Sure enough, several bodies blocking the doorway had transformed into walkers. Those who'd been arguing on the broadcast, now with bullet wounds, ragged necks, and dead eyes. Louis's gaze went cold. He leaned his skateboard against the wall, drew a knife from his waist with his right hand, and moved. He sidestepped a lunge, drove the blade into the creature's temple, then spun and slammed his skateboard against another walker, pinning it to the wall. In less than 10 seconds, the room fell silent again, the only thing left the same eerie hymn loop that had been broadcasting on repeat. Having dealt with the immediate threats, Louis turned and, through the thick soundproof glass, saw Daryl and the others locked outside the door. Daryl had a hammer raised as if to smash the glass, but froze when he saw Louis standing unharmed inside. His face was filthy, but relief flashed in his eyes. Louis nodded to tell them to stay calm, then moved to the control console. The sophisticated broadcasting equipment was a mess, smeared with blood and brain, and a heavy metal instrument had been knocked over, pressing down on the panel as if it had fallen in the chaos. Louis pushed the weight aside and reached for the red stop button. Nothing. The hymn still screamed through the speakers. He frowned. The internal wiring must be damaged. Glancing at the people outside the glass, he turned his back to shield them from view and prepared to use a different method. He slipped his hand into his sleeve and produced a wand. With a light tap against the big machine, his lips moved in a whisper. Reparo. He put the wand away, feigned impatience, and slapped the console twice, old school, like fixing an old TV. Slap! Slap! He pressed the button again. Bzzzt! With a final, faint electrical buzz, the maddening hymn cut off. The world fell quiet. On the side building rooftop, Andrea pulled her gaze from the sniper scope and exhaled like a weight had been lifted. Louis can't help but surprise me and scare me to death every time, she said, both relieved and rueful. In the side building lobby, the woman who had been grimly preaching about enjoying the final moments stood staring out the window, mouth open. She hadn't seen the whole stunt, only the small black shape as it moved through the air, but it was enough. A cigarette burned down between her fingers until the ash fell and scalded her skin. She jerked her hand back without crying out, muttering, "Ha! Now I'm seeing kids flying through the sky. Is this a sign the world's ended?" After confirming the broadcast was completely off, Louis unlocked the door. Click. Daryl rushed in. Hedgehog Head followed, still bewildered by the rapid turn of events. "You," Daryl looked Louis over, then at the corpses on the floor, incredulous. "How did you get in here? How were you so fast?" Louis leaned in the doorway and grinned. "Did you forget? I'm a house elf. I can teleport." Daryl snorted and wiped blood and grime from his face, not letting on that he didn't believe it. "Fine, since you're so capable, teleport us back right now." "Nope," Louis shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "I'm a free elf. I don't take orders from humans." Hedgehog Head couldn't help himself and piped up, scratching his head with a conflicted look. "I know you're joking, but couldn't you at least say you're a wizard or something? Those house elves in the movies look weirder than you." Daryl laughed, the tension easing for a moment. But the reality outside still hung over them. The music had stopped, but the massive horde of walkers the broadcast had drawn to the area hadn't dispersed. Without the signal, they hadn't wandered off. They still crowded the building, surrounding the control booth so tightly nothing could get through. Louis walked to the broken window and looked down. He frowned and keyed his walkie-talkie. Shane, what's it like outside? Not good. Shane's voice crackled over the radio, heavy with static and worry. The broadcast stopped, but the earlier commotion was loud. The area around the station is full of walkers now, and a large group has been drawn to the camp's perimeter. If we don't clear the walkers inside soon, Shane continued, once the outer defenses are breached, we'll be squeezed between those two hordes. We'll be meat patties. After a few hurried words with Shane, Lewis walked to the window and quickly scanned the terrain outside. How are the other rooms in the 3? He asked. Aside from those few just now, any other survivors or walkers? I already cleared the walkers in the other rooms, Daryl replied succinctly. Some rooms are locked, so I'm not sure, but there are probably no living people left. Shane's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. The maddening broadcast had finally been shut off, but the walkers were still pressing in. They remained pinned behind cover. The danger was far from over. Lewis's gaze drifted to the entrance of an unfinished A1 in the distance. Construction debris lay piled nearby, and rusted scaffolding stood in tiers beside it. The image he had seen while gliding through the air earlier flashed back, and a daring plan took shape. He pressed the talkie button, a corner of his mouth tugging up. Here's the thing. I have a plan. On the roof of the Zero, most of the survivors, relieved the broadcast was dead, gathered in small groups to argue about how to clear the remaining walkers or when to evacuate. The slightly plump otaku, however, stayed like a war correspondent, camera lifted and trained on the 3. All right, little brother, stop filming, his well-built older brother said, coming over and patting his shoulder. Save some battery. No, it's not over yet, the otaku muttered without looking away, adjusting the lens. I have a premonition that today, I'm closest to my dream. His brother scoffed. Your dream? To be a photographer? A Hollywood director? The otaku turned and glared. A hero, like the heroes in comic books who save the world. The pitying looks from the others made him flush, and he hurried to defend himself. I know you think I'm crazy, carrying comic books, consoles, figurines, like they're dead weight. You think we should be carrying water and food because that's what you need to survive. He pushed his glasses up and grew solemn. But have you thought about this? When everyone is running, they all grab water and food, so those things won't be scarce. What I brought is the spiritual food that'll be most scarce in the apocalypse. When you're bored to death in the shelter, my stuff will have value. I'll trade it. To prove his point, he produced a neatly wrapped chocolate bar from his pocket with pride. See? This is what I just traded for. Those around him glanced at the chocolate, and for a moment, the kid's warped logic almost seemed to make sense. Just then, his younger sister blinked wide and innocent eyes. Isn't that what Brother Louis said when he wanted to borrow your remote car earlier? You wouldn't lend it at first. You only gave it to him after he said he'd fix it. The otaku's face froze. Laughter bubbled around him. Ahem! That's not important. He cleared his throat twice, scrambling for something to save face, when a sudden reflection flashed across the corner of his lens. That's... Behind a half-collapsed wall at the 2 on the rear of the 3, something moved. He went silent, held his breath, and refocused. The next image made him gasp. A dull roar filled the air. A pitch-black, heavy motorcycle burst down the ramp of the bright 2 like a beast freed from its cage. With a thunderous landing, its fat off-road tires crushed 2 walkers beneath them. The impact bucked the bike, threatening to flip, but the rider's forearms bulged as he fought the handlebars and held it steady. Riding pillion was Louis. Before the bike even stopped, Lewis's pistol barked. A handful of shots dropped 3 walkers lunging in from the flanks and cleared a path. The 2 men and the motorcycle screamed away in a spray of dust, followed by a horde of pursuing walkers. From the viewing angle, the bike soon vanished into the shadows between buildings. Damn it! The otaku slapped his thigh. I missed it! I should have stolen a drone from a digital store before coming here. On the square, the motorcycle had burst through the encirclement and peeled into a slightly more open area. Daryl didn't accelerate full throttle. He kept the speed in a careful band, exactly as they'd planned. The engine's roar acted like a beacon, drawing every walker's attention. The horde that had been pressing Shane's position swung like a pack of sharks and charged after the bike. They're leaving. The pressure's off. someone shouted from behind cover. On the motorcycle, the two were in sync. Daryl handled the riding, weaving through ruins and mangled cars, keeping the walkers trailing closely, but never letting them close the gap or lose the scent. Louis sat backward on the rear seat, one hand on the gun, firing at any walker that tried to flank or close in. More and more walkers funneled in from all directions, threatening to surround them. Even Daryl felt his scalp prickle. "Hey, there are too many of them. Are you sure this is okay?" "Drive," Louis shouted. "I'll handle the walkers." A metallic click, Louis's pistol clicked empty. He didn't flinch. The empty magazine ejected, and with one practiced motion, he slapped a fresh one into place, chambered around, and resumed picking off rotten faces with headshots. A discarded metal crate loomed ahead. Daryl leaned the bike hard, and they sliced a hair-raising arc at speed, narrowly avoiding it. After the maneuver, Louis glanced over his shoulder. "That's about enough." He patted Daryl's shoulder as they checked the horde behind them. Nearly 80% of the camp's walkers now clustered and following in their wake. 197. Crisis resolved. "Hold on tight!" Daryl roared, twisting the throttle hard. The motorcycle kicked into a sharp, tail-flicking U-turn, then thundered straight toward the garage entrance. In front of them, a steep earthen ramp had been piled up for construction. Overhead, a flat-topped canopy and a row of heavy steel beams and rusted scaffolding spanned the opening. "Charge!" Daryl's eyes were wild as he pinned the throttle. The bike became a black cannonball, charging up the slope and launching into the air like a flash of lightning. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to slow. Under the terrified stares of the onlookers, the motorcycle arced up beneath the scaffolding. Louis moved. Mid-air, he sprang to his feet on the back of the bike, pushed off with both legs, and detached himself, whipping out a black rope. Click! The specialized metal grappling hook caught precisely on a horizontal steel beam overhead. Losing the weight of his passenger, the motorcycle completed its leap, slamming down onto the opposite canopy and sliding several meters before stopping. Using the momentum, Louis swung on the rope like a pendulum, tracing a huge semicircle through the air. Wind screamed past his ears. He released the hook, adjusted his posture, and landed smoothly on the upper platform of the scaffolding, each motion fluid and exact, leaving the crowd speechless. Behind them, the massive five couldn't stop from sheer momentum. Packed together like sardines, they spilled down the garage ramp. From his high perch, Louis looked down at the dense mass below. Directly beneath him, on a temporary materials platform above the ramp, were dozens of heavy sevens, bound together with several bright yellow industrial straps. This was the gift Louis had prepared. He drew the short knife at his waist, a cold smile on his lips. "Catch this." Before his words faded, he slashed the straps. The cords snapped, snap, and the bound sevens burst free. Boom! The heavy shapes scattered and tumbled down the steep concrete slope. The crash of steel on concrete was thunderous. Rolled by momentum, they became ruthless steamrollers, knocking the eights down like dominoes. Crack! Squelch! The sickening sounds of bone-shattering and flesh-tearing mixed in the dust. The sevens rolled to the bottom and jammed together at the narrows, forming a tangled, immovable barricade. Along with the crushed bodies, they became a steel defensive line that completely blocked the horde's path back up. Gradually, the dust settled. The immediate crisis was over. Louis pocketed his knife and looked across at Daryl, who had stopped on the opposite flat roof, holding the motorcycle upright. The two men exchanged a nod. On the distant roof of the main building, the otaku boy was watching the whole thing on his small camera screen, his excitement almost making him kiss the lens. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. He replayed the footage over and over, only now remembering to breathe. If they'd gone the other way, I would have missed it. I'd regret that forever. The others around him were too numb from the day's events to be thrilled. Watching the two black-clad figures, one big, one lithe, by the parking lot, and remembering Louis's earlier feats, a man in the crowd swallowed hard and asked his companion dully, "Where did Wells find these people?" "Could they be the X-Men?" the companion offered. "No such thing as the X-Men in real life," another voice replied, then brightened. "MI6? Maybe?" A short time later in the main administrative building's lobby, Louis and Daryl walked through to a hero's welcome. Applause and cheers filled the previously tense space. If not for the very real "do not approach" aura radiating from Daryl, the two might have been hoisted into the air by the grateful survivors. "All right, everyone." Luis waved them down, trying to calm the cheering. He didn't look pleased with the attention. "Now's not the time to celebrate. I need to rest first. Then I may have to help with the wounded." "You haven't even caught your breath, and you're already thinking about work?" Daryl leaned against the wall and shot Luis a sidelong grin. "What? You planning to run for President of the United States? You're awfully dutiful for a future commander-in-chief." "If that were true, I'd definitely vote for him," Al said, crossing his arms and grinning like the idea amused him. "Guys, stop jinxing Luis," Shane said with mock exasperation. "I'd like him to live a little longer." Louis sank into a chair, unscrewed a water bottle, and took a long drink. "And by the way," he said with a deadpan look, "under the U.S. Constitution, I still have 24 years before I'm eligible to run." A beat of silence, then he added wryly, "Given the state of things, maybe by then the Eights will have evolved a civilization and started their own United States." It broke the tension. The room erupted in laughter. After a short rest and some quick reorganization, everyone went back to work. Shane stayed to coordinate, while Al and Daryl took a handful of strong survivors to move the corpses and reinforce the defensive lines. Outside, the fighting was winding down. Shane's team swept the last of the Eights, and Andrea remained on the side, providing cover with her sniper rifle. The mood eased. The camp began to breathe. Then Shane walked back into the lobby with a group of survivors he'd picked up. Among them was a strange old man in a tattered gray jacket. Most striking was a slightly askew black cross tattooed on the back of his withered hand. The survivors were congratulating each other when the old man stopped in the doorway. He didn't thank anyone. Instead, he stared past Shane, out the window toward the area where the clearing had taken place, and his trembling finger jabbed in that direction. His hoarse, high voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Make him stop! Quick, make him stop!" Shane blinked. "What?" he said, taken aback. "Who?" "That man," the old man croaked. "He's a devil, a butcher." He turned his bloodshot eyes to everyone in the lobby, panic and outrage making his hands shake. "We're safe now, so why is he still killing them?" Waving the tattooed hand as if it were proof, he hissed, "Lock them up. Their lives. You have no right to decide life or death. Oh God, you are committing a crime." Shane stared at him, utterly baffled. 198. Persuade. Hearing this, Shane frowned and went to the window to look again at the cleanup work happening outside. After confirming that the fallen figures were walkers and not living people, he turned back and fixed the rambling old man with a faint, mocking smile. The old man wore a battered gray jacket with a green badge pinned to his chest that read All Species Coexistence Society, likely some pre-apocalypse NGO. He was furious at the group's indifference, waving his arms and preaching the same tired theories, spit flying as he spoke. "Don't you see? They can still move. They still search for food. That proves they're still alive. This is just a damn virus like rabies or Ebola. They're practically no different from us. We shouldn't slaughter patients. Even to protect ourselves, can't we just lock them up and wait for a vaccine? Why do we have to kill them? This is wrong." His voice was inflammatory. Behind him, a young mother clutching her child wavered. She thought of her eldest son, locked in the basement by her husband, who had turned into a walker just days ago. "Is he right?" she asked, voice trembling, a dangerous spark of hope lighting her eyes. "If we don't kill them, does that mean my child can still be saved?" Several nearby survivors who had also lost loved ones began whispering, their faces full of doubt. Seeing the old man starting to sway the crowd, Al, who had just come back from helping a new wave of people, went cold. He stood up abruptly and kicked the chair in front of him over. The loud crash made everyone flinch. Grabbing his still-dripping machete, he strode toward the wavering group and stood over the old man. "Listen, old man." Al's voice was low. "I used to work in a nursing home and took care of a lot of stubborn folks like you. I respect my elders, and I have patience. But—" He slammed the machete down on the table with a heavy thud, wood chips scattering. "If anyone causes trouble for our people right now, or tries to open the door for those monsters outside," he leaned down, voice soft but deadly, I'll throw you out and let you ask your relatives in person whether they still recognize you." The murderous aura worked. Al had once played a mob boss to deceive Rick. That ruthlessness had been honed, and it intimidated those who were about to be swayed by the old man. But the old man was a hardliner. His face tightened, yet he kept his chin up, almost excited by the confrontation. "Violence cannot hide the truth. You can kill me, but you can't kill everyone," he snapped. "Every life is a gift. What you're doing now is destroying the last glimmer of humanity. We should use love to awaken them, not bullets to end them." A smattering of applause answered him. Then it cut off as Shane came forward, slow, clapping. "Sir, your mercy is very moving," Shane said. "I once knew a priest who believed the walkers were nothing more than lost souls like you. He was willing to offer living people to them to try to achieve some union of soul and flesh." The old man's jaw dropped. "What nonsense are you talking about?" "Your eyes look just like his," Shane said quietly, full of a martyr's light. He stepped past the old man and walked to the blast door of the hall, placing his hand on the handle. "If you're so convinced they're innocent lives, our neighbors, our relatives, then why are you hiding behind this wall like a rat?" Shane made a show of beginning to unlock the door, then looked back at the old man with a sincerity that chilled. "Go on. Embrace them. Enlighten them. Like that priest, you could even offer yourself as a kind of sacrament. That's piety, isn't it?" He cracked the door open. Instantaneously, the roar from outside flooded into the hall. "Come on," Shane said softly. "I'll grant your wish. Go reunite with your neighbors. Don't let this blast door stand in the way of your love." "You?" The old man's bravado collapsed. He stumbled backward, nearly falling, his face ashen. "You want to get me killed? You lunatic. Those are monsters. They'll eat me." Shane slammed the door shut. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of offended anger. "Get you killed? Didn't you just say they were lives? Letting you go be with them is getting you killed now?" He closed the distance in strides. "So you know perfectly well they're man-eating monsters, and still you stand here pretending to be a saint? To satisfy your ridiculous moral superiority, you drag everyone down with you?" The old man was speechless, lips trembling. Lewis appeared from the temporary clinic, wiping his hands. He'd heard everything. Shane's method had been perfectly surgical. Someone who'd trained under that lunatic, the shepherd, would pick apart such fallacies like that. Lewis walked over, patted Shane's arm, and addressed the old man calmly. "Don't blow a gasket, Shane. I think the gentleman's just afraid no one will care for him if he turns. You can rest easy." Lewis paused and gave a pointed smile. "Shane's father used to keep a barn full of walkers. He kept them for a long time. So if you have an accident and turn, I'm sure Shane will be happy to take good care of you the way his father taught him." The color drained from the old man's face. He managed, through gritted teeth, "You're all beyond saving," and slunk toward the second floor. "I'll go keep an eye on him." Al, worried the man might try to open a window or otherwise cause trouble, followed with his knife in hand. Lewis' smile faded. He faced the survivors gathered in the hall. "Listen, everyone. Walkers are what people become after they die. This isn't the flu, and it's not a disease you can cure. It's death, an irreversible physiological process. The dead cannot be brought back. Anyone clinging to false hope, treating walkers as relatives, friends, or pets, will meet only one end. They'll get themselves killed and take the truly living down with them." Shane took a breath and added softly from the side, "My dad was one of those people who clung to false hope. Someone paid with blood before he finally woke up. I don't want you to repeat his mistake." Silence fell. Those who'd been shaken by the old man's words bowed their heads. "We must listen to the doctor," someone declared. The otaku, who had been filming the whole time, nodded furiously and shouted, "Luis is a top expert from the CDC. If he says it, it's true." He gestured to the crowd with mock solemnity. "And based on my experience watching hundreds of horror movies, anyone who tries to reason with monsters or thinks they're friends never even survives the first 10 minutes. Only by listening to the professionals and staying united can we get out of this alive." 199 returned to prison. After the hidden dangers inside the main building were eliminated, the battle outside was also winding down. Wells, Shane, and the others cleared the walkers from the plaza, piling the bodies in the center. A fire roared up, black smoke carrying away the camp's final filth. It was late and everyone was exhausted, so they didn't push back to the prison that night. They stayed 2 days, reinforcing perimeter walls, patching the breaches at the radio station, and teaching the survivors some basic survival skills. When the time came to leave, the convoy was loaded up with supplies from the trade and thank you gifts from the people they'd helped. Wells decided to stay behind. There were too many things to organize and rebuild. He'd lead the camp and keep it a dependable ally on the outside. Brady, Shane, Daryl, Lewis, and the rest readied themselves to return to the prison, with Steve bringing the goods they'd collected. Doctor, a kid, an otaku type, hovered beside Louis's car window, clutching a huge backpack. He wanted to go to the prison with Louis badly. Hanging out with the man the kid called Dr. Strange seemed a lot cooler than staying at the boring camp. His 7-year-old sister supported the idea, but the rest of his family had overruled him. He hesitated then, as if making up his mind, dug into his treasure chest backpack and produced an exquisite yellow box. "This, for you." He shoved the box into Louis's hands, scratching his head, half embarrassed. "It's the best remote-control bumblebee transformer of this generation. It can't do tricks like Helena, but it's still awesome." Louis stared at the new toy on his lap, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Warmth crept into him anyway. "Thanks, I'll take good care of it." He reached into the back seat, pulled out a spare handgun from the weapon crate, checked the magazine, and handed it to the kid grip first. "Take this." The boy froze, then clumsily accepted it. The weight and cold metal sent his eyes bright. "Listen, pal." Louis' smile dropped away. He spoke seriously through the car window. "Comics and figurines might feed your soul, but they won't stop a walker's teeth." He pointed at the heavy backpack. "Next time you have to run for your life, fill that bag with water and canned food first. If worst comes to worst, at least carry a gun with bullets." He looked the kid square in the eye and spoke slowly. "The prerequisite for trading is having the strength to protect your collection. Your collector's life only matters if you stay alive. Understand?" The slightly chubby otaku blinked, the grin wiped clean from his face. He stood straighter and nodded solemnly. "I understand, Doctor." The solemnity lasted less than 3 seconds. The kid suddenly whipped out a video camera and pointed it at Louis, urgent and pleading. "Wait, Doctor! That was so philosophical. I have to record it as my motto. Please, say it again for the camera. Keep that cold look from just now." Louis's mouth twitched. Daryl, driving up front, listened to the commotion behind him and finally rolled his eyes. He squeezed a Jesus through his teeth, leaned out and shouted, "Let's go!" Vroom! The accelerator slammed down. The SUV roared, tires kicking up dust as it bolted away, leaving the bewildered kid clutching his camera. A few hours later, the familiar walls of the prison rose into view. Before Louis could steady himself, a reddish-brown figure dove from the watchtower, shot through the open car window, and crashed into his arms. "Hoot!" Robin the owl nuzzled its furry head against Louis's chest, as if scolding him for being gone too long. Louis laughed and stroked the feathers. All right, I'm back. I'll take you out next time." People inside the gates came out at the noise. Rick's worried frown smoothed when he saw the convoy coming home whole and loaded. He clapped Shane on the shoulder as the man stepped from the vehicle. "How's the situation?" "It's a long story." Shane wiped sweat from his face, tired but relieved. "We ran into more trouble than we expected, but it turned out okay. Most importantly, our people are all here, not a single one missing." Clusters of friends reunited, Shane talking quietly with Beth and Herschel, Amy hugging Andrea and checking for wounds. Andrea grinned. They were actually pretty hospitable. At one point, someone asked if I was MI6 and had come to save them. Laughter bubbled around. After a bit of arguing, they decided I must be an undercover FBI agent. Merle clapped Daryl so hard on the back it sounded like a gunshot. "Hey, little brother, you still breathing?" "What else?" Daryl shoved him off. "How'd I get myself killed listening to you?" Al slipped past them, knocking fists with Philip, who'd been left behind to help manage things. Then everyone set to work, unloading the prized supplies. Children gathered around Louis. Carl elbowed his way through, face twisted in mock fury. "Louis, where did you get those Christmas return gifts you gave me?" "You mean the general science workbooks and the illustrated guide to toxic wilderness flora and fauna? Luis raised an eyebrow. I snagged them at a bookstore. In this age without schools, knowledge is power. Power my foot. Carl clutched his forehead. My mom found them. She's been making me finish the first 10 pages these past 2 days. You must feel a great sense of accomplishment, Louis teased. No, I hate you, Carl moaned. Louis couldn't help laughing. They ate a quick dinner in the cafeteria, then the core members met in the conference room. Shane recounted in detail what they'd seen at the National Guard base. The soldier who apparently returned to life without having been bitten, and the raving man at the radio station who'd made disturbing remarks. The mood in the room grew heavy. Rick sat at the head of the table, fingers tapping the wood. He listened, then lifted his head, eyes sweeping the room. His voice was low and hard. So that means... He let the sentence hang, then filled it in. The base didn't fall because the walls were weak or because the external horde broke through. It fell because they didn't know, because they didn't realize. Everyone is a carrier. Shane nodded. Bodies of people who died of natural causes weren't treated. They turned inside the camp, caused chaos, and before the guards even realized what was happening, the outside horde rushed in. A silence fell. Even the breathing in the room seemed louder. Herschel's face tightened. So any death, anywhere, could be a start. You can't tell who's clean. We have to change how we handle the dead, Rick said, voice hardening. No more leaving bodies. No more graves without strict precautions. Burn them, seal them, something that makes sure they can't come back. And anyone who was inside a collapsed compound or around dead people needs to be quarantined and watched. Beth swallowed. What about people who weren't bitten and act fine? The soldier, he came back without being bitten. How do we treat him? With extreme caution, Shane said. We can't assume. If he reanimated once, who's to say he won't again? We'll isolate, observe, and if there's any sign, he didn't finish the sentence. The meaning was clear. Louis folded his arms. We need to tell other safe places we trade with. They need to know bodies can turn without a bite. This isn't just a horde problem. It's inside people. Rick's jaw set. We'll shore up the quarantine procedures, enforce it hard. No exceptions. We'll put up signs, brief everyone, and change the rules about how we accept survivors. We'll keep trading, but with our eyes wide open. Wells, who had stayed behind at the camp, had sent word about improving defenses and instituting proper body handling. That plan would be a starting point. They argued over specifics long into the night. Where to burn, who would be responsible, who would enforce the rules. Because if the lesson from the National Guard base was anything, it was that the enemy wasn't only outside the walls. Outside, the prison hummed with the ordinary noises of survival, the clang of metal, the murmur of people setting up to sleep, someone laughing too loudly in the dark. Inside the meeting room, the mood was sober but resolute. They'd learned something ugly and dangerous, and now they had to live by the lesson. Tomorrow, they would brief everyone else. Tonight, they would sleep with one eye open. The incident had been a wake-up call for the prison. We need a stricter monitoring system going forward. After a moment, he added, anyone who's sick or injured has to be isolated and observed until they recover, or... He let the rest of the sentence hang. Everyone in the room knew what he meant and silently accepted the decision. To ease the tension, Rick took a breath and turned his attention to the other side of the table. By the way, they backed off with a bunch of curses. Rick frowned. These kinds of skirmishes weren't new, but they demanded constant vigilance. Did they look organized? Lewis, who had been quiet until then, interrupted in a casual tone while twirling a pen. I mean, could they be from some big camp nearby? Or doesn't seem like it. Glenn shook his head, remembering the details. They were thin, sickly looking, their clothes filthy. By the way, Lewis, I heard you put on quite a show out there, scaling walls and leaping across rooftops dozens of feet high. Any trouble? Rick asked. Lewis shrugged theatrically. Danger? Sure. He adopted a mock solemn tone. The greatest danger I faced this time was Alan Darrell almost nominating me to run for President of the United States. Fortunately, I used the Constitution to fend them off. Laughter broke out around the room. The black ink touched the paper and didn't dry. It vanished instantly, like water sinking into a sponge. The surface returned to blank, as if nothing had been written. Louis froze, pupils narrowing. The feeling of déjà vu slammed into him. As someone who had read the books, the scene immediately brought to mind the Horcrux diary that had almost resurrected Lord Voldemort. What's going on? He flung the paper away like it was hot, and his wand slid into his hand automatically. This suitcase transferred a Horcrux? That shouldn't be possible. He stared at the scrap lying in the bottom of the case, mind racing. Harry had used the suitcase to clear out junk back in second year, and the diary had been in his possession for a while then. Could it have been mixed in? No, Louis frowned. He clearly remembered finding seeds in the suitcase earlier that were completely dead. That suggested that when the case transferred things between worlds, either the energy wasn't enough to transport living organisms, or it destroyed them. A Horcrux is a dark object, but at its core, it's a fragment of a soul, a form of life. If seeds couldn't survive, how could a Horcrux cross? Could the Horcrux no longer be complete? Was this page the corpse of a Horcrux, a remnant, or some residual magical mechanism? Alarm shifted into curiosity. The urge to investigate outweighed his fear. He leaned closer to the suitcase and tapped the scrap with his wand. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up the pen again, acting as if he didn't know what to expect, and cautiously wrote on the paper, "Hello." The handwriting disappeared again. 1 second, 2. Then, slowly, unfamiliar black letters bled up from the page. "Hello." Louis took a breath and wrote, "Who are you?" "I am Tom Marvolo Riddle.